Carl Jung uncovered a psychological pattern so eye-opening that it could prevent the endless cycle of over-explaining and people-pleasing that traps so many people. Within his studies, he observed cases where people-pleasers clung so tightly to their social mask that it broke them. This is how the dangerous spiral begins. Maybe it started when your feelings were called too much or wrong. Maybe you learned that you needed external validation to prove that you could exist. Or perhaps you discovered that if you just explained yourself perfectly enough, everyone would finally accept you. Jung spent decades mapping the hidden patterns that trap us in endless justification. He found that compulsive explanation isn't politeness, it's a wound where your authentic self was rejected so completely that you now seek permission just to be. This video will show you what's really happening when you over-explain, why it keeps you small, and how to reclaim the quiet authority that lives beneath all those words. By the end, you'll understand the psychological architecture of people-pleasing and have one practice to start dismantling it today. Now, let's examine the first pattern that keeps you trapped in the explanation spiral. Jung discovered something most people never see. We don't just wear masks for others, we mistake the mask for our face. He called this the persona, and it's not simply how you act at work or with strangers. It's a whole system of relations between you and society, carefully designed to win approval and hide what's real. The persona is built from collective expectations. Your name, your role, your manners, the right way to be. It feels serviceable in public, but flat underneath. Two-dimensional. When your ego fuses with this mask, you live for recognition. Your worth hangs on whether others approve. And that's where chronic explanation takes root. You defend the mask because without it, you fear you're unacceptable. Here's what makes this so insidious. We prune ourselves to fit the role. We sacrifice what Jung called far too much of our common humanity to maintain the image. The parts that don't fit get shoved down, ignored, rejected. And the thinner the mask gets, the more defensive we become. You over-explain precisely where you're most afraid of being exposed. But the unconscious self, your real individuality, doesn't vanish when you wear the mask. It compensates. The more one-sided you live, the more your unconscious swings to the other side. Dreams that unsettle you, moods you can't name, symptoms you rationalize away. Over-explaining becomes your defense against these eruptions. You argue them into silence instead of listening to what they're asking you to integrate. Jung also warned about inflation. When you loosen the mask through therapy or honest self-work, collective images and feelings can flood up. You might feel unusually large or strangely small, ancient and mythic. For people-pleasers, inflation often shows up as moral grandstanding, a new mask that hides behind "I'm so understanding" or "I just care too much." Same cage, different bars. The way out isn't to build a better mask, it's honesty. Ask yourself, what in me is genuinely individual, and what merely represents a role or mask I'm holding? If your defense works for anyone in your position, it belongs to the mask, whereas the authentic reply is quieter and more real. It admits its shadow and authentic limitations without apology. But before we can access that authenticity, we need to understand the process that gets us there. Jung called the path to freedom individuation, the process of differentiating from collective demands and developing internal authority. It begins with taking your inner life seriously enough to see it for what it is. In a world of slogans, statistics, and endless opinions, this responsibility gets traded for belonging. People-pleasing is exactly that trade. You surrender inner authority for the comfort of external approval. He contrasted mass methods with genuine relationship. You should, and you must, provoke either resistance or hollow conformity. Real growth requires a zone inside where your motives aren't coerced by someone else's expectations. Overexplanation is a covert plea for permission. Individuation is saying less so you can feel more and decide clearly. The shadow complicates this work. Your shadow holds every element of yourself you've disowned: anger, sexuality, power, envy, play. Jung noticed how easily we project evil onto others while identifying ourselves with noble ideals. The people-pleaser's version is moralized niceness that disavows boundary setting, then meets it, resentfully, in everyone else. For example, you call them selfish, when, really, you're terrified of your own legitimate self-interest. Withdrawing these projections lets you meet those energies as yours, and that's where they become strength instead of poison. When you own your capacity for anger, you gain access to clean boundaries. When you own your desire for recognition, you stop performing for scraps. The shadow isn't your enemy, it's your disowned power waiting to be integrated. Jung insisted that 1,000,000 zeros don't add up to one. Culture depends on individuated people, not crowd size. Mass movements, religious, political, therapeutic, feel strong but decay into credulity. Overexplaining is micro-mass psychology. You try to sell yourself with words instead of standing in lived choice. Individuation trades persuasion for position. Fewer reasons, more responsibility. Fear keeps most people from this path. We worry about what we'll find if we stop talking and listen. Jung said the unconscious is objective, a second psychic authority that arrives unbidden, and humility before it is psychologically necessary. People-pleasing masks this fear by keeping attention outward where you can manage impressions. But when you turn inward, you discover that your impulses aren't lawless. They can be evaluated, refined, integrated into character. He also linked genuine love to modesty born of shadow work. Relationships don't thrive on performed perfection. They deepen through admitted imperfection and mutual support. Where love stops, power begins. Fewer words paired with real limits create trust. People learn your yes and no are real. But knowing this intellectually isn't enough. You have to live it. And that's where Jung's final insight changes everything. After breaking with borrowed frameworks, Jung entered what he called a confrontation with the unconscious. He suspended theory and let dreams and fantasies lead. The decisive move was personifying inner figures and speaking with them, treating them as events and natural parts of himself, not abstractions. This inner dialogue stripped them of tyrannical power and clarified his position, choice by choice. In short, this is a process called active imagination. For you, breaking the chain of over-explanation involves the same process. You meet what arises inside and answer it honestly, instead of arguing it away with more words or justifications. Let's take a look at how Jung carried out his own inner dialogue and what he gained by interacting with these imaginary symbols. First, he encountered visions of flood, blood, cosmic frost, images bigger than him. These seemed to echo in the outer world with the beginning of World War I. He learned through this experience that these images are psychic facts, and they demand relation, not justification. He answered by doing the next right thing: journaling, painting, building with stones. In this, he learned that meaning came from concrete and authentic acts that honored and worked with what he discovered. In one dream, Jung had to kill Siegfried, a symbol of the heroic ideal. Grief marked his secret identification with that fantasy of control and conquest. Then, rain signaled the easing tension between his conscious will and the unconscious flow. In the same way, Jung had to relate to and then release his heroic ideal. People-pleasers must also let go of the ideal of being endlessly agreeable to be loved. The relinquishment feels like the death of virtue, but it opens room for centered, human strength. Later, Jung met Philemon, Salome, Elijah, inner figures who taught him psychic objectivity, the ability to observe inner elements and experiences with a detached perspective. His task was to take a position relative to them, not confuse himself with them or dismiss them as fantasy. Furthermore, he found that calling them art absolved responsibility, whereas calling them nature, a part of himself, demanded a reply. The feelings and images that arise aren't arguments. They're a call to action for deeper understanding of the self. To prevent being lost in his inner world and fantasies, Jung kept a counterpoise in ordinary life through family, patience, work, and his routines. He tracked inner shifts with daily mandalas. When he treated the material dishonestly, the mandalas fractured. When honest, they held. For chronic overexplainers, grounding routines such as sleep, work, walks, and journaling can help stabilize expression so you don't lose yourself in the active imagination process. Then, the Liverpool dream crystallized his whole process of inner development. A dark city arranged around a lamplit pool where a small island blazed. The center stood as the source of life. He understood you can't go beyond the center. Through this dream, he gained a sense of meaning for the self-development process he had been going through. You see, when you stop performing for the crowd and return to your center, speech simplifies. "This is right for me" becomes our authentic truth. Lastly, a synchronistic confirmation arrived, a painted mandala that felt distinctly Chinese, suggesting a bridge between Eastern philosophy and his own experience. Around the same time, Richard Wilhelm's The Secret of the Golden Flower found its way to him, articulating what he had already lived and connecting the two coincidences. Authentic expression often calls forth such echoes once enacted. Life responds with synchronicities. Thus, certainty is not argued into existence. You act from it, and reality rises to meet you. Jung insisted that insight must become obligation and habit, translated into how you treat others, or it decays into power games. For empaths and people-pleasers, liberation isn't hardening. It's alignment. Fewer promises, cleaner commitments, deeper silence, clearer no's, and warmer yeses. Now, let's bring this ancient wisdom into your everyday life. Here's one practice you can begin today, what Jung would call recognizing the autonomous complex of explanation. Step 1. Name the urge. When you feel compelled to justify a boundary, emotion, or choice, pause. Ask yourself, am I explaining because they asked, or because I fear their disapproval? Don't judge the answer, just notice. This pattern operates independently of your conscious will. It's a psychological structure Jung called a complex, and awareness begins to loosen its grip. Step 2. Make a simple statement. Instead of the 3-paragraph defense, try a single sentence. I'm not available tonight. That doesn't work for me. I've decided to do this differently, No reasons, no apologies, no negotiations with yourself mid-sentence. This develops what Jung called individual authority. In essence, you draw strength from your authentic self instead of begging for external validation. Step 3. Sit with the discomfort. When others react to your unexplained boundary, confusion, disappointment, even anger, resist the automatic urge to over-explain and soothe. Breathe. Let the silence exist. Remind yourself that this too is part of the process. This is individuation in real time. You're differentiating your true self from collective expectations. The discomfort is proof you're doing it right. Each time you stay centered, instead of scrambling to justify, you build the unshakable foundation Jung described. You don't have to become cold or withholding. Instead, this process is about trusting that your reality doesn't require an external element to exist. Start small. One unexplained boundary this week. Notice what happens in them and in you. Then, keep experimenting. Here's the thing. You were never supposed to explain your way into existence. The wound and shadow convinced you otherwise. But now you know. The center of who you are is enough validation to exist. Once you can access that, people-pleasing and over-explaining is no longer a necessity for your existence. Jung spent his life proving that the psyche self-corrects when we stop forcing it into borrowed shapes. Your silence isn't withholding, it's the sound of something true returning. Fewer words, more presence, less defense, more depth. When you stop explaining yourself to others, you discover that it didn't really matter in the first place. Then your life changes. Thank you for joining me on this exploration into Jung's map of liberation from over-explanation. If this resonated, please share your reflections in the comments below and subscribe for more journeys into the depths of practical psychology, philosophy, and personal development. Until next time.